The champagne bubbles sparkled under crystal chandeliers, but Natalie Morgan felt nothing but dread. She stood in the grand ballroom of the Metropolitan Hotel, wearing an emerald green gown that had taken 3 weeks to custom design. Her husband, Brett Morrison, was somewhere in the crowd, schmoozing with investors for his latest tech venture. After 13 years of marriage, she knew his patterns, his rhythms, his tells. Tonight felt different. Natalie adjusted the pearl necklace at her throat, a gift from their 10th anniversary. She had been the one who'd helped Brett launch his first company from their tiny apartment kitchen. While he pitched ideas, she'd crafted the marketing strategy, designed the brand identity, and convinced skeptical investors with her presentations. Together, they'd built Morrison Technologies from nothing into a $200 million empire. Ladies and gentlemen, Brett's voice boomed through the speakers, pulling Natalie from her thoughts. He stood on the stage, looking impeccable in his tailored Tom Ford tuxedo. His smile was wide, confident, almost manic. Thank you all for celebrating with us tonight. This gala supports youth entrepreneurship, a cause close to my heart. Natalie smiled politely, preparing for the usual speech about giving back and creating opportunities. She'd helped him write these words 100 times. But tonight isn't just about charity, Brett continued, his tone shifting. It's about truth. About living authentically. A cold sensation crawled up Natalie's spine. The public execution. For years, I've maintained an image, Brett said, his voice taking on a rehearsed vulnerability that Natalie recognized as his sincere entrepreneur persona. But true success means having the courage to embrace change, even when it's difficult. The room had gone quiet. Natalie felt every eye beginning to turn toward her. Marriage is a partnership, Brett continued, but sometimes partnerships run their course. Sometimes you meet someone who reignites your passion for life, who reminds you what it means to be alive. Natalie's handbag slipped from her fingers, hitting the marble floor with a muffled thud. I want to introduce you all to someone very special, Brett said, extending his hand toward the stage wings. The woman who's shown me what authentic love looks like. Everyone, please welcome Sienna Cole. A young woman emerged, all gleaming blonde hair and impossible cheekbones. She wore a white dress that cost more than most people's monthly rent. Natalie recognized her instantly, Sienna Cole, the Instagram influencer with 12 million followers who'd been consulting on Morrison Technologies' rebranding campaign for the past 6 months. The cameras flashed. Brett pulled Sienna close, kissing her in front of 500 guests and a dozen news cameras. The applause started slowly, confused, then grew louder as people realized this was meant to be celebrated. Natalie stood frozen, her world fracturing into sharp, cutting pieces. The aftermath. Her phone buzzed incessantly. Text messages flooded in. Some sympathetic, most curious, a few cruel. Her best friend Amanda had sent a single message, "I'm so sorry, but I think we should talk about boundaries going forward. Brett is still my friend too." Natalie fled to the bathroom, her heels clicking against marble like a countdown. In the mirror, she saw a woman she barely recognized, elegant, poised, and completely destroyed. When she finally emerged 40 minutes later, the gala had moved on. People were dancing, drinking, pretending they hadn't just witnessed a marriage incinerate in real time. Brett and Sienna were gone, probably to some exclusive afterparty where everyone would congratulate him on his brave honesty. The driver took her home to their penthouse in silence. When she tried her key, it didn't work. The locks had been changed. An envelope was taped to the door with her name written in Brett's assistant's handwriting. Inside was a hotel keycard and a letter from Vincent Cross, Brett's attorney. The letter detailed that marital assets were frozen pending legal proceedings, that she had violated the terms of their prenuptial agreement through failure to support her husband's emotional well-being, and that she had 24 hours to remove her personal belongings under supervised conditions. The phone call. 3 days later, Natalie sat in a budget hotel room, surrounded by garbage bags filled with her hastily grabbed possessions. Her attorney, Rachel Torres, had been blunt: the prenup is airtight. He's claiming you were a contracted creative consultant, not a true business partner. We can fight, but it'll cost more than you'll win. Her phone rang. Unknown number. Hello? Miss Morgan, my name is Oliver Grant. I work for Julian Blackwood. Mr. Blackwood would like to meet with you tomorrow at 2 o'clock. A car will be sent to your location. Natalie's breath caught. Julian Blackwood was a legend, a reclusive billionaire who'd made his fortune in private equity and real estate. He owned half of Manhattan but lived like a ghost, never attending parties, never giving interviews, never appearing in society pages. Why would Julian Blackwood want to meet with me? Mr. Blackwood doesn't share his reasoning over the phone, Oliver replied smoothly. But I can assure you, Miss Morgan, it would be in your best interest to attend. 2 o'clock tomorrow. The car will be there at 1:30. The line went dead. The decision. Natalie stared at her reflection in the hotel mirror. Her eyes were red-rimmed from crying. Her hair needed washing. She looked defeated, broken, exactly how Brett wanted her to look. She thought about the last 13 years. How she'd sacrificed her own career in graphic design to build his company. How she'd smiled through his condescending comments about her cute little marketing ideas. How she'd ignored the late nights and mysterious phone calls because she'd been so desperate to believe in their partnership. The anger began as a spark, then grew into a flame. When the black car arrived the next afternoon, Natalie was wearing the one good suit she'd managed to grab from the penthouse, a sharp navy Armani that made her look like she meant business. She'd dried her tears, fixed her makeup, and straightened her spine. If Julian Blackwood wanted to meet her, she had nothing left to lose. And a woman with nothing to lose, Natalie was beginning to realize, was the most dangerous kind of woman. Julian Blackwood's office wasn't what Natalie expected. Instead of the cold glass tower she'd imagined, the car pulled up to a restored brownstone in the West Village. The interior was warm, filled with art that actually meant something, original sketches, vintage photographs, pieces that told stories rather than displayed wealth. Julian himself was similarly unexpected. He was older than Brett, with silver threading through his dark hair and lines around his eyes that suggested someone who actually smiled occasionally. He wore a simple black sweater and dark jeans. No power suit, no aggressive handshake, no performative dominance. "Miss Morgan," he said, his voice quiet but commanding. "Thank you for coming. Please, sit." Natalie perched on the edge of a leather chair, her posture defensive. "Your assistant said you wanted to meet. I'm here. But I should tell you up front, whatever business proposition involves me, I have no money and no access to Brett's company anymore." "I'm aware," Julian said, pouring 2 cups of tea from a ceramic pot. "I've followed your career with interest for several years. Your rebranding campaign for Morrison Technologies was brilliant. The emotional storytelling angle, the focus on human connection rather than just innovation, that was all you, wasn't it?" Natalie blinked, surprised. "Brett presented it, but yes. I developed the strategy." "And the Morrison Foundation's education initiative? The scholarship program that's helped over 3,000 students?" "I designed that program," Natalie said, her voice stronger now. "Brett hated it initially. Said it wasn't profitable enough. I convinced him it was good for his image." Julian nodded slowly, his gray eyes assessing her. "Brett Morrison is a mediocre entrepreneur with exceptional marketing. You were his marketing, Miss Morgan. And now he's thrown away his most valuable asset for Instagram likes and a younger model. The proposal." "I don't need a recap of my humiliation," Natalie said sharply. "If that's why I'm here." "I want to hire you," Julian interrupted. "Not as a favor. Not as charity. As a legitimate business proposition." Natalie froze. "Hire me for what?" "I invest in companies that are struggling with brand identity and market positioning. I have 17 businesses in my portfolio right now that need exactly what you gave Morrison Technologies. I need a creative director who understands how to tell authentic stories, who can see the heart of a company and communicate it to consumers. He slid a folder across the desk. Inside was a contract. Salary is $400,000 annually, plus profit-sharing options. You'll have a team of 5, full creative control, and a housing stipend to get you out of that hotel. Your first project is rebranding a sustainable fashion company that's bleeding market share to fast fashion competitors. Natalie's hands trembled as she held the contract. This is more than I was making at Morrison Technologies. You were criminally underpaid, Julian said flatly. You built a brand worth $200 million. You should have been compensated accordingly. Why? Natalie asked, looking up at him. Why are you doing this? You don't know me. Julian leaned back in his chair, his expression unreadable. Brett Morrison is a problem for me. He owes money to some investors I advised, and his recent behavior is making him unpredictable and risky. But more than that, Miss Morgan, I despise waste. You're an exceptional talent being thrown away because a narcissist needed a newer trophy. I don't believe in letting valuable assets rot. The transformation. 2 weeks later, Natalie stood in her new apartment, a beautiful converted loft in Soho with exposed brick and floor-to-ceiling windows. Julian's team had arranged everything, from furniture to a new wardrobe consultation with a stylist who actually listened to what Natalie liked rather than dressing her like someone's wife. Her first project consumed her. The sustainable fashion brand, Thread and Earth, had an incredible mission but terrible messaging. Natalie dove in, interviewing the founders, visiting their factories, understanding their supply chain. She worked 16-hour days, fueled by coffee and righteous anger. The campaign she developed was raw and honest, real women telling real stories about why they chose sustainable fashion. No supermodels, no perfection, just authenticity. Within 3 weeks of launch, Thread and Earth sales increased by 47%. Julian's only comment when he reviewed her work, exceptional. As expected. Meanwhile, Brett's empire was showing cracks. Morrison Technologies stock had dropped 12% since his gala announcement. Major clients were quietly walking away, uncomfortable with the public spectacle. Industry insiders whispered that Brett's judgment was compromised, that he was making emotional decisions rather than strategic ones. Natalie watched it unfold from a distance, feeling strangely detached. She was too busy building her own future to care about his implosion. The return. The real shift came 6 weeks after their separation. Natalie was invited to speak on a panel about authentic brand storytelling at a major marketing conference. She almost declined, afraid of facing the industry gossip. But Julian had been adamant. You did nothing wrong, he'd said firmly. You have nothing to hide from. Go to that conference and remind them who actually built Morrison Technologies. So she went. She wore a burgundy suit that made her feel powerful, styled her hair in a sleek professional cut, and spoke on that panel with confidence born from actually knowing what she was talking about. The moderator asked about her recent work with Thread and Earth. Natalie discussed the campaign's philosophy, the importance of authentic storytelling, how consumers responded to genuine human connection rather than manufactured perfection. Some might say you learned these skills at Morrison Technologies, the moderator prompted carefully. Natalie smiled, a sharp, knowing smile. Morrison Technologies learned these skills from me. There's a difference. The audience erupted in applause. Brett was in the audience. Natalie saw him in the third row, his jaw tight, Sienna beside him scrolling through her phone looking bored. When Natalie stepped off the stage, 3 different companies approached her with consulting offers. That evening, Julian sent her a text, "Well done. Dinner tomorrow? We should discuss expanding your role." Natalie looked at the message, feeling something shift inside her. This wasn't rescue. This was partnership. This was being valued for her actual abilities rather than her ability to make someone else look good. She texted back, "Yes. And Julian, thank you for seeing me." His response came quickly, "I always see value where others are foolish enough to overlook it. That's how I became a billionaire." But underneath, a second message, "You're not an investment, Natalie. You're a revelation. See you tomorrow." Natalie read those words 3 times, something warm unfurling in her chest that had nothing to do with business and everything to do with being truly seen for the first time in years. 3 months after Natalie's panel appearance, Brett's world was collapsing in spectacular fashion. Morrison Technologies had lost 2 major contracts, and investors were demanding explanations for the company's declining performance. Sienna, it turned out, was excellent at taking selfies but terrible at understanding business strategy. Her consulting work consisted mostly of suggesting they make everything more Instagrammable. Brett had fired 3 executives who'd questioned his decisions, creating a paranoid atmosphere where no one dared tell him the truth. The company culture Natalie had carefully built, collaborative, innovative, human, had been replaced with fear and instability. Meanwhile, Natalie was thriving. She'd successfully rebranded 4 companies in Julian's portfolio, each one seeing significant market gains. Industry publications were calling her the brand whisperer, and she'd been featured in Forbes' 40 Under 40 list despite being 38. The article pointedly noted that she was finally receiving recognition for work previously attributed to others. Julian had become more than her employer. They worked together seamlessly, his strategic business mind complementing her creative vision. He challenged her, respected her opinions, and never once took credit for her ideas. More than that, they'd developed an easy friendship, late dinners discussing philosophy and art, quiet mornings reviewing portfolios over coffee, moments of comfortable silence that spoke of deep understanding. Natalie hadn't planned on falling for him. But somewhere between the business meetings and the mutual respect, she'd realized that Julian Blackwood saw her completely, her brilliance, her vulnerability, her strength, her scars, and valued all of it. The final battle. The divorce proceedings had dragged on for months, with Brett's lawyer Vincent Cross fighting every single point. But Rachel Torres, Natalie's attorney, had been quietly building a case with ammunition Julian's team had helped uncover. The final hearing took place on a gray Tuesday morning. The courtroom was smaller than Natalie had imagined, less dramatic than the movie suggested. Brett sat at the opposing table looking haggard. Sienna wasn't with him. Tabloids reported they'd taken a break after she'd been photographed with a professional soccer player. Vincent Cross presented their case first, arguing that Natalie had been a salaried employee with no claim to marital assets beyond what the prenuptial agreement specified. He painted her as bitter and vindictive, trying to destroy Brett's reputation out of jealousy. Then Rachel stood up. "Your Honor, I'd like to submit evidence that Morrison Technologies' most valuable assets, its brand identity, marketing strategy, and public image, were created entirely by Mrs. Morgan. We have emails, internal documents, and testimony from 12 former employees confirming that Mrs. Morgan was the chief creative force behind every successful campaign." She projected images on the courtroom screen, Natalie's original sketches, strategy documents with her handwriting, emails where Brett had simply written "approved" on her proposals without contributing any ideas. Furthermore, Rachel continued, "We have evidence that Mr. Morrison deliberately excluded Mrs. Morgan from business contracts and financial accounts starting 18 months ago, systematically removing her access while continuing to use her creative work. This constitutes not just a violation of marital partnership, but intellectual property theft." Brett's face went white. The hearing lasted 4 hours. Witness after witness testified about Natalie's contributions to Morrison Technologies. Former employees described how Brett would take Natalie's ideas into meetings and present them as his own. The company's former CFO admitted that Brett had been hiding assets in offshore accounts, preparing for the divorce long before the gala announcement. The most damning evidence came from Brett's own assistant, who provided emails showing Brett had been planning his public relationship reveal with Sienna as a rebranding opportunity to appeal to younger demographics. Their entire romance had been a calculated PR stunt, one that had spectacularly backfired. "Mr. Morrison," the judge said, her voice cold with disdain, "I find your treatment of your wife to be not only morally reprehensible but legally fraudulent. This court awards Mrs. Morgan 60% of Morrison Technologies' valuation, full ownership of 3 properties, and damages for intellectual property theft." Brett erupted, his lawyer struggling to contain him. "She doesn't deserve anything. I built that company." "You built nothing," the judge snapped. "Your wife built it. You simply put your name on her work. This hearing is adjourned." The new beginning. Natalie walked out of the courthouse into unexpected sunshine. Rachel was grinning, already fielding calls from news outlets. But Natalie barely heard any of it. She felt light, unburdened, free in a way she hadn't felt in 13 years. Julian was waiting by his car, leaning against it with his characteristic calm presence. He didn't say anything, just opened his arms. Natalie walked into them, letting herself be held by someone who'd never once tried to diminish her. "You won," he said quietly. "We won," Natalie corrected. "I couldn't have done this without you." Julian pulled back slightly, looking at her with those gray eyes that saw everything. "Natalie, you could have done this without me. You just needed someone to remind you of your own strength." "Is that why you helped me?" she asked. "To teach me a lesson?" "No," he said, his voice dropping to something intimate, vulnerable. "I helped you because watching him waste you was unbearable. Because I knew exactly what he had and couldn't stand to see him throw it away. Because..." He paused, choosing his words carefully. "Because I'm a selfish man, and I wanted the chance to know you. The real you, not the version you created to survive your marriage." Natalie's heart hammered. "And now that you know me?" Julian smiled, a real smile that transformed his usually serious face. "Now I'd like to take you to dinner. Not as your employer, not as your ally in legal warfare, but as a man who is completely fascinated by you and would very much like to see if you might possibly feel the same way. The future." 6 months later, Natalie stood in the conference room of her own company, Morgan Creative, a brand consulting firm she'd launched with her divorce settlement. She had a team of 15 talented designers and strategists, all of them passionate about authentic storytelling. Julian was her first investor, though she'd insisted on paying market rate for his capital and maintaining majority ownership. Brett had been forced to sell Morrison Technologies at a loss. Last she'd heard, he was trying to launch a cryptocurrency venture that no serious investor would touch. Sienna had moved on to a tech billionaire in Silicon Valley. Natalie felt nothing when she thought about them. No anger, no bitterness, just a vague sense of gratitude that their betrayal had forced her to rebuild herself into something stronger. Her phone buzzed. A text from Julian: "Dinner tonight? I found a place that serves authentic Northern Italian. Your favorite." She smiled, typing back, 7 o'clock. "And Julian?" "I'm bringing wine. The expensive kind. We're celebrating." "What are we celebrating?" "The fact that I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be." 3 dots appeared, then, "So am I." Natalie looked out the window at the Manhattan skyline, at the city she'd conquered not through someone else's success, but through her own brilliance finally recognized. Brett had left her with nothing, thinking it would destroy her. Instead, it had set her free. And Julian hadn't covered her in diamonds to make her sparkle, he'd simply held up a mirror so she could finally see that she'd been brilliant all along.